Martha, we took so long of getting here. There's hundreds of people between us and the platform. I just wish once you could get ready so we'd get someplace early.
Oh, what's the sense of getting here 3 hours early just so as we could stand up close? If your man Abe had a big enough voice, like a real orator, we'd be able to hear him just fine from right here.
At least you can see your man when he stands up. Our little giant hardly shows above the crowd. Wish they'd give him a box or something to stand on when his turn comes.
He doesn't need a box. He's just fine, Hiram, as long as he stands on his principles.
We can always tell folks we saw Lincoln and only heard the judge. Get it, Mama? We saw Abe and only heard the judge.
I never saw so many wagons, buggies, people on horseback, people on foot. I swear the dust they all kicked up. I'll never get these clothes clean.
Ain't that a woman? Worried about dust when really important matters is at issue here. And not just slavery, there's states' rights at stake, too, you know.
Right you are, Jess. We don't need no federal government telling us how to live our lives. State sovereignty must not be compromised.
They finally got the young fellows off the platform, made room for the reporters and the politicians.
Yes, Joe, but not before they nearly wrecked the framework climbing on top for a better view.
Now that collapsed lumber's been cleared away, maybe we can begin. It's nigh on 2 o'clock already.
I'm surprised to see old Chief Shabana up there among them. Why, he must be 80 years or older by now.
Yes, it grieves me to see him looking so poorly. Surely he's nearing the end of his days.
Shabana has been a friend to the white man all these many years. Samuel, it grieves me, too.
This crowd sure's in a holiday mood today.
They'll wear themselves out if they keep hollering.
You know, Joe, I just wish they'd get started with the debate part. They waste so much time introducing all the local politicians before they get down to it.
Well, Martha, Mayor Glover just presented Owen Lovejoy. It looks like they may let Abe split some rails soon. Douglas's views are well enough known. I'm anxious to hear what our man has to say.
Your man Lincoln has tried his hand at enough lines of work without much success. Storekeeper, farmer, land surveyor, law, now politics. Can't seem to make up his mind.
Sarah, you'll see today the debating's not much different from wrestling. You see what moves the other fellow's gonna make, and you try not to let him get an advantage on it.
Oh, if it all got settled by wrestling, Abe sure would have the advantage. What, with him being a champion wrestler? And having those long arms and legs to give him punches and leverage?
With this noisy crowd, all talking and cheering, and the bands and the fireworks, we'll maybe have to read in the papers what got said by each. That is, if those reporter fellas can write fast enough to get it all down. You know, they say in Chicago, the Chicago papers have men who use a new system. I believe it's called shorthand. Shorthand, yes. Can get every word.
The future of this nation may hang in the balance over these debates. The country's taken sides already.
Yeah, these Lincoln people can't seem to lead well enough alone. We don't need abolitionists and free staters to tell others how to run their business.
How long do you reckon this whole affair's gonna last, Hiram?
Well, the first speaker gets an hour, and that's Douglas today, and then Lincoln gets an hour and a half. And then the judge gets to finish off with a half hour at the end.
Yep, Hiram, those are the rules they agreed to beforehand. Then they'll change places for the next debate. I believe that's in Freeport next week.
Oh, my land, that's 3 hours we'll be sitting here once they finally get started.
Just looking at him, you can tell Lincoln is way outclassed. Why, his clothes look rusty and his hair is shaggy and unkempt.
And just look at Stephen Douglas. Confident, clean-shaven, dressed neatly in the finest clothes you ever saw.
Yes, the judge is a dandy for dress, and well-built, the little plug he is. But how much do looks count for?
What counts, Samuel, is what gets said and how folks consider the arguments between debates.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the city of Ottawa for this auspicious occasion. I'm Mayor Joseph Glover. You know, we've got quite a crowd today. I was talking to one of the Philadelphia newspaper men. he told me he thought there were 10,000 people here. I know you've come from far and near, on foot, by cart, by canal, and by railroad. I'm told that from the edge of the city, all of the dust that's been kicked up makes Ottawa look like a great smokehouse. You know, things are happening in Ottawa. Our population has doubled in the last 10 years. The railroad has just reached Ottawa, and the canal has put us on the map. I think that has something to do with good leadership. Speaking of which, I have some prominent people up here on the stage that I would like to introduce to you today. To my left is Mr. Abraham Lincoln, and Mrs. Lincoln behind him. Let's see, next to him we have the Reverend Owen Lovejoy, and John Fisk Nash. And who do we have here? In the back row we have Washington Bushnell. Stand up, Mr. Bushnell. You've done a lot for this town. Sit down. Major General Wallace. And who else do we have up here? Oh, Justice John Caton. Stand up, Judge. And next to him, Mr. B.C. Cook. I also have a couple dear friends of mine, the Fredericks, who came all the way from Utica. Would you stand up, ladies? And your name. Well, over here we have Stephen Douglas, Senator, and his lovely wife, Adele. Next to Mrs. Douglas is Mr. W.H. Cushman. The back row with Mr. William Coswell. Next to him, Mr. John Manley. And finally, Mr. William Reddick. We're here today to hear two great men debate the important issues of the day, slavery and states' rights. Senator Stephen Arnold Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. W.H. Cushman, who will introduce Senator Douglas. Here's Chief Shabana. Chief, have a seat down at the end, please. He's always late.
Distinguished guests and fellow citizens, it is my honor to represent the Democratic Party today, introducing Stephen Arnold Douglas, candidate for United States Senate and present chairman of the U.S. Committee on Territories. In 1854, Douglas's committee reported the now famous Kansas-Nebraska bill. It established the essential principle of popular sovereignty, allowing the people to decide for themselves the issue of slavery. Senator Douglas achieved the passage of this important legislation by virtue of diligent, hard work, and excellent, brilliant floor leadership. Without his dedication and support, this bill would not have passed, and that cornerstone of freedom and the rights of the individual states would have been greatly eroded. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that Senator Douglas will stir your hearts today as he defends the great principles of democracy. We owe Senator Douglas our vote and eternal gratitude. I count it a rare opportunity and a great privilege to present to you one of the country's great men, Senator Stephen Arnold Douglas.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appear before you today for the purpose of discussing the leading political topics which now agitate the public mind. By an arrangement between Mr. Lincoln and myself, we are present here today for the purpose of having a joint discussion on the principles and issue between these two parties. Now, in 1851, the Whig Party and the Democratic Party united in Illinois in adopting resolutions endorsing and improving the principles of the compromise measures of 1850. Thus, you see that up to 1853, 1854, the Whig Party and the Democratic Party both stood on the same platform with regard to the slavery question. Now, that platform was the right of the people of each state and each territory to decide their local and domestic institutions for themselves, subject only to the federal Constitution. Now, during the session of Congress of 1853-54, I introduced to the Senate of the United States a bill to organize the territories of Kansas and Nebraska on that principle, which had been adopted on the compromise measures of 1850. Now, in order that there might be no misunderstanding in relation to the principle involved in the Kansas and Nebraska bill, I put forth the true intent and meaning of the act in these words. It is the true intent and meaning of this act not to legislate slavery into any state or territory or to exclude from it therefrom, but to leave the people thereof perfectly free to form and regulate their domestic institutions in their own way, subject only to the federal Constitution. In 1854, Mr. Abraham Lincoln and Mr. Trumbull entered into an arrangement, one with the other, and each with their respective friends, to dissolve the old Whig Party on one hand, and to dissolve the old Democratic Party on the other hand, and connect the members of both into an abolition party under the name and the disguise of the Republican Party. In pursuance of this arrangement, the parties met at Springfield in October 1854 and proclaimed their new platform. Oh, they laid down on that occasion a platform for their new Republican Party, which is to be thus constructed. Now, I have the resolutions of that state convention then held, which was the first mass state convention ever held in Illinois by the Black Republican Party, and I now hold them in my hands and will read a part of them and cause the others to be printed. Now, here are the most important and material resolutions of this abolition platform. 1. Resolve that we believe this truth to be self-evident, that when parties become subversive of the ends for which they are established or incapable of restoring the government to the true principles of the Constitution, it is the right and the duty of the people to dissolve the political bands by which they have been connected wherewith, and to organize new parties upon such principles and with such views as the circumstances and exigencies of the nation may demand. 2. Resolved that the times imperatively demand a reorganization of parties, and repudiating all previous party attachments, names, and predilections, we unite ourselves together in defense of the liberty and Constitution of the country, and will hereafter cooperate as the Republican Party, pledged to the accomplishment of the following purposes: to bring the administration of the government back to the control of first principles, to restore Nebraska and Kansas to the position of free territories, and that as the Constitution of the United States vests in the states and not in the Congress the power to legislate for the extradition of fugitives from labor, to repeal and entirely abrogate the fugitive slave law, to restrict slavery in those states to which it exists, to prohibit the admission of any more slave states into the Union, to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia, to exclude slavery from all the territories over which the general government has exclusive jurisdiction, and to resist the acquirements of any more territories unless the practice of slavery therein forever shall have been prohibited. 3, resolved that in furtherance of these principles, we will use such constitutional and lawful means as shall seem best adapted to their accomplishment, and that we will support no man for office under the general or state government who is not positively and fully committed to the support of these principles. Yeah. Hear, hear. Now, gentlemen, your black Republicans have cheered every one of these propositions. And yet I venture to say you cannot get Mr. Lincoln to come out and say that he is now in favor of each and every one of them. Oh, that these propositions, one and all, constitute the platform of the black Republican Party of this day, I have no doubt. And when you were not aware of what purpose I was reading them, your black Republicans cheered them as good black Republican doctrines. Now, my object in reading these resolutions was to put the question to Abraham Lincoln this day, whether he now stands and will stand by each article of that creed and carry it out. I desire to know whether Mr. Lincoln today stands as he did in 1854 in favor of the unconditional repeal of the Fugitive Slave Law. I desire him to answer whether he stands pledged today, as he did in 1854, against the admission of any more slave states into the Union, even if the people want them. Now, I want to know whether he stands pledged against the admission of a new state into our Union with such a constitution as the people of that state may see fit to make. I want to know whether he stands today pledged to the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. I desire him to answer whether he stands pledged to the prohibition of the slave trade between the different states. I desire to know whether he stands pledged to prohibit slavery in all the territories of the United States, north as well as south of the Missouri Compromise line. I desire him to answer whether he's opposed to the acquisition of any more territory unless slavery is first prohibited therein. Oh, I want him to answer these questions in order that when I trot him down to Lower Egypt, I may put the same questions to him in Cairo. My principles are the same everywhere. I can proclaim them alike in the north, the south, the east, and the west. My principles will apply wherever the Constitution prevails and the American flag waves. I desire to know whether Mr. Lincoln's principles will bear transplanting from Ottawa to Jonesboro. I put these questions to him today distinctly and ask an answer. I have a right to an answer, for I quote from the platform of the Republican Party made by himself and others at the time that party was formed. Now, having formed this new party for the benefit of deserters from Whiggery and deserters from democracy, and having laid down the abolition platform, which I have read, Lincoln now takes to the stand and proclaims his abolition doctrine. Now, let me read a part of them. In a speech at Springfield to the convention which nominated him for the Senate, he said, "In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall. but I do expect it to cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all another. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward until it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Mr. Lincoln, following the example and lead of all the little abolition orators who go around and lecture in the basements of schools and churches, reads from the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, and then asks, how can you deprive a Negro of that equality which God and the Declaration of Independence awards him? Well, I do not question Mr. Lincoln's conscientious belief that the Negro was made his equal and hence his brother. But for my own part, I do not regard the Negro as my equal, and I positively deny that he is my brother or any kin to me whatsoever. Now, he belongs to an inferior race and must always occupy an inferior position. Now, I do not hold that because the Negro is our inferior, that therefore he ought to be a slave. Now, you and I are bound to extend to our inferior and dependent being every right, every privilege, every facility and immunity consistent with the public good. Now, the question then arises, which each state and each territory must decide for itself. Now, Illinois has decided for itself. We have provided that the Negro shall not be a slave, and we have also provided that he will not be a citizen. Now, I hold that Illinois had a right to abolish and prohibit slavery as she did. And I hold that Kentucky has the same right to continue and to protect slavery that Illinois had to abolish it. I hold that New York had as much right to abolish slavery as Virginia has to continue it, and that each and every state of this union is a sovereign power with the right to do as it pleases on this question of slavery. Why should Illinois be at war with Missouri, or Kentucky with Ohio, or Virginia with New York, merely because their institutions differ? Our fathers intended that our institutions should differ. They knew that the North and the South, having different climates, productions, and interests, required different institutions. Now, this doctrine of Mr. Lincoln's of uniformity among the institutions of the different states is a new doctrine never dreamed of by Washington, Madison, or the framers of our government. Mr. Lincoln and the Republican Party have set themselves up as wiser than these men who made this government, which has flourished for 70 years under the principle of popular sovereignty, recognizing the right of each state to do as it pleased. Oh, under that principle, we have grown from a nation of 3 or 4 millions to a nation of about 30 millions of people. We have crossed the Allegheny Mountains, filled up the whole Northwest, turning the prairie into a garden and building up churches and schools, thus spreading civilization and Christianity where before there was nothing but savage barbarism. Under that principle, we have become from a feeble nation the most powerful on the face of the earth. And if we only adhere to that principle, we can go forward increasing in territory, in power, in strength, and in glory until the Republic of America shall be the North Star that shall guide the friends of freedom throughout the civilized world.
Why, Joseph, the judge used Lincoln's own "a house divided against himself" speech against him.
He says we've revealed ourselves as black Republicans by supporting that argument, and he says it proves we want to force the whole nation to the abolitionist cause.
He's such a polished speaker and so clever. He quotes Lincoln's earlier speeches and cuts the ideas to ribbons.
His side's really getting whipped up. He knows how to work a crowd into a lather.
Ain't fair the way he twists Abe's words so they don't say what they was meant to say.
Abe has said Douglas tries to make a horse chestnut seem like a chestnut horse.
The little giant has lived up to his name. He's shown the confidence and power that won him his nickname.
Now let's see what Lincoln has to say for himself. He doesn't look very sure of himself.
Our next speaker is Abraham Lincoln, and he will be introduced by his good friend, John Fisk Nash.
Distinguished guests and fellow countrymen, I first met Abraham Lincoln in 1846 when he was a candidate for Congress in the Sangamon District. In 1854, it was my pleasure to meet him again at the State Fair. In 1856, Mr. Lincoln was at the convention held to organize the Republican Party and put forth the platform for the presidential election to follow. In recent days, I've become even more impressed by Abraham Lincoln and all that he stands for. In today's Chicago Press and Tribune, they praise Mr. Lincoln for, and I quote, his eulogy of the Declaration of Independence stands as one of the high points of the campaign. He delivered this stirring defense of the Declaration of Independence just 4 days ago in Lewistown, reminding the people of Lewistown that the framers of the Declaration held these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the thread of these truths that inspires Mr. Lincoln to run for this Senate seat, and is the preservation of these ideals so basic to the founders of this great nation that brings Mr. Lincoln to Ottawa and to this historic moment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege and pleasure to introduce your Republican candidate for U.S. Senator, Mr. Abraham Lincoln.
My fellow citizens, when a man hears himself somewhat misrepresented, it provokes him. At least I find it with myself. But when the misrepresentation becomes very gross and palpable, it's more apt to amuse him. The first thing I see fit to notice is the fact that Judge Douglas alleges, after running through the history of the old Democratic and the Whig parties, that Judge Trumbull and myself made an arrangement in 1854 by which I was to take the place of General Shields in the United States Senate, and Judge Trumbull was to take the place of Judge Douglas. Now, all I have to say upon that subject is that I think no man, not even Judge Douglas, can prove it, because it isn't true. I have no doubt that he is conscientious in saying it. Now, as to those resolutions he took such a length of time to read as being the platform of the Republican Party in 1854, I think that Judge Trumbull had nothing to do with them, and I also say that I had nothing to do with them, and Judge Douglas cannot show that either one of us ever had anything to do with them. Now, I do believe this is true about those resolutions. There was a call for a convention to form a Republican Party in Springfield, and I think my friend Mr. Lovejoy, who is on the stage, had a hand in it. I think this is true, and if he will remember accurately, he will be able to recollect that he tried me to get into it, and I would not go in. I also believe it is true that I went away from Springfield while the convention was in session to attend court in Tazewell County. So it is true they did place my name without any authorization upon the committee, and afterwards wrote me about a meeting of the committee, but I refused to do so, and I've never had anything to do with the organization. This is the plain truth about all that matter of resolutions. Now, I hate to waste my time on such things, but in regard to the general abolition tilt that Judge Douglas makes, when he says that I was engaged at the time of selling out and abolitionizing the old Whig Party, I hope you will permit me to read a part of a speech that I made then in Peoria, which will clearly show a different view of the position which I took in that contest in 1854. Well, yes, sir, I'm obliged to. I'm no longer a young man. This is the repeal of the Missouri Compromise. We have before us the chief material enabling us to correctly judge whether the repeal of the Missouri Compromise is right or wrong. I think, and I shall try to show that it is wrong. Wrong in the direct effect, letting slavery into Kansas and Nebraska, and wrong in its prospective principle, allowing it to spread to every other part of the wide world where men can be found inclined to take it. Now, this declared indifference, but as I must think, real covert zeal for the spread of slavery, I cannot but hate. I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself. I hate it because it deprives our Republican example of its just influence in the world. It enables the enemies of free institutions, with plausibility, to taunt us as hypocrites. It causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our sincerity, and especially because it forces so many real good men amongst ourselves into an open war with the very fundamental principles of civil liberty, criticizing the Declaration of Independence and insist that there is no right principle of action but self-interest. Before proceeding, let me say that I have no prejudice against the Southern people. They are just what we would do in their situation. If slavery did not now exist among them, they would not introduce it. If it now did exist amongst ourselves, we should not instantly give it up. And when the Southern people tell us that they are no more responsible for the origin of slavery than us, I acknowledge the fact. And when they remind us of their constitutional rights, I acknowledge them, not grudgingly, but fully and fairly. And I would give them any legislation for reclaiming of their fugitives, which should not in its stringency become more likely to take a free man into slavery than our ordinary criminal laws are to hang an innocent one. But all of this, to my judgment, furnishes no more excuse for permitting slavery to go into the free territory than it would be for reviving the African slave trade by law. Now, I have reason to know that Judge Douglas knows that I said that. I think he has the answer here to the one of the questions he just put to me. I do not mean to allow him to catechise me unless he pays back for it in kind. I will not answer one question after another unless he reciprocates. But since he's made this inquiry and I've answered it before, he's got it in without me getting one in return. Now, I will say here while upon this subject, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe that I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. I have no purpose to introduce political and social equality between the white and the black races. But I hold, notwithstanding all of this, there is no reason in the world that the Negro is not entitled to all the natural rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence: the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I hold that he is as much entitled to these as the white man. I agree with Judge Douglas that he is not my equal in many respects, certainly not in color, perhaps not in moral or intellectual endowment, but in the right to eat the bread without the leave of anyone else, which his own hand earns. He is my equal. He is the equal of Judge Douglas, and he is the equal of every living man. Since I haven't used up as much time as I thought I had, would you hold my coat for just a minute? Let me dwell a little bit longer on one or two of these other minor topics upon which the judge has spoken. He read from my speech in Springfield, in which I said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Does Judge Douglas say it can stand? I don't know whether he does or not. He doesn't seem to be paying attention to me right now. But I would like to know if it's opinion that a house divided against itself can stand. And if he does, there is certainly a question of veracity, not between him and me, but between the judge and an authority of somewhat higher authority. And when he undertakes to say that because this union cannot exist permanently so divided, that I'm in favor of bringing about a dead uniformity, he argues very erroneously, as I will try to show. The great variety of the local institutions of the states spring from the differences in their climate, and they're really the bonds of union between the state, each furnishing the means to supply the wants of the other. They become no apples of discord. They do not make a house divided against itself, but they do make a house united. Now, if they produce in one section of the country what is qualified by the wants of another, and this section can supply the wants of the first, they are no matters of discord, but true bonds of a union. But can this question of slavery be assimilated to these things? I leave it to you to say that whether, in the history of our government, this institution of slavery has not always failed to be a bond of union, and on the contrary, been an apple of discord and an element of division. If so, I have a right to say that in regard to this question, the union is a house divided against itself. And when the judge reminds me that I've often said to him that the institution of slavery has existed for some 80 years in some states, and yet it does not exist in others, I agree to the fact, and I account for it by looking at the position in which our fathers originally placed it, restricting it from the new territory where it not had gone, legislating to cut off its source by the abrogation of slave trade, thus putting the seal of legislation against its spread. The public mind did rest in the belief that it was in the course of ultimate extinction. But lately, and in this I charge nothing to the judge's motives, lately I think he and those acting with him have placed that institution upon a new basis, which looks at the perpetuity and the nationalization of slavery. When my friend Judge Douglas came to Chicago on the 9th of July, this speech being made on the 16th of June, he made a harangue there in which he took hold of this speech of mine, showing that he had carefully read it, and while he not paid no attention to this matter at all, he complimented me as being a kind, amiable, and intelligent gentleman, notwithstanding I'd already said this. And he goes on and draws out from my speech this tendency of mine to set the states at war with one another, to make all the institutions uniform, and to set the Negroes and the white people to marrying together. And then, as the judge had complimented with these pleasant titles, and I must confess my weakness, I was a little taken, for it came from a very great man. I'm not very accustomed to flattery, and it came the sweeter to me. I was rather like the Hoosier with the gingerbread when he said he reckoned he loved it better than any other man, and he got less of it. I want to call your attention to a portion of the Nebraska bill which Judge Douglas has quoted. It being the true intent and meaning of this legislation, not to legislate slavery into any territory or state, nor to exclude it therefrom, but leave the people thereof perfectly free to form and regulate their domestic institutions in their own way, subject only to the Constitution of the United States. Thereupon, Judge Douglas and others began arguing in favor of popular sovereignty, the right of the people to have slaves if they want them, and to exclude slavery if they did not want them. But, says a senator from Ohio, Mr. Chase, I think, we more than suspect you do not mean to allow people to exclude slavery. And I do believe I have the amendment here with me, which was offered, and under which the people of the territory, through their proper representation, might, if they saw fit, prohibit the existence of slavery therein. Now, I state it as a fact, to be taken back if there's any mistake about it, that Judge Douglas and those acting with him voted that amendment down. I now think those men who voted against it had a real reason for doing so. They know what the reason was. It looks to us, since we have seen the Dred Scott decision pronounced holding that under the Constitution the people cannot exclude slavery, I say it looks to outsiders, us poor, simple, amiable, intelligent gentlemen, as though a niche was left as a place to put the Dred Scott decision in. A niche would have been spoiled by adopting that amendment. Now, again, there is in that same quotation from the Nebraska bill this quote: "It is the true intent and meaning of this bill not to legislate slavery in any territory or state." I've always been puzzled to know what business the word state had in that connection. Judge Douglas knows. Judge Douglas put it there. The law they were passing was not about states, and was not for making provision about states. What was it placed there for? After seeing the Dred Scott decision, which holds that the people cannot exclude slavery from a territory, if another Dred Scott decision shall come, holding that they cannot exclude it from a state, then we shall discover when the word was originally put there, it was in view of something that was yet to come in time. We shall see that it was the other half of something. Now I say again, if there is any reason, different reason for putting it there, Judge Douglas, in a good-humored way, and without calling anybody a liar, can tell us what the reason was. Now, my friends, in the little time I do have left, I ask the attention of the people here assembled and elsewhere to the course that Judge Douglas is pursuing every day as bearing upon this question of making slavery national. Not going back to the records, but taking the speech he makes, the speech he made yesterday and the day before, and makes constantly all over the country, I ask your attention to them. In the first place, what does it take to make the institution national? Not war. There is no danger that the people of Kentucky will shoulder their muskets and march into Illinois. There's no danger of us going over there and making war upon them. Then what is necessary for the nationalization of slavery? It is simply the next Dred Scott decision. It is merely for the Supreme Court to decide that no state under the Constitution can exclude it, just as they've already decided under the Constitution neither Congress nor the territorial legislature can. When that is decided and acquiesced in, the whole thing is done. This being true, let us consider what Judge Douglas is doing every day to that end. In the first place, let us see what influence he's exerting on the public sentiment. With public sentiment, nothing can fail, and without it, nothing can succeed. Consequently, he who molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts the statutes or pronounces decisions. He makes statutes and decisions possible or impossible to be executed. Judge Douglas is a man of vast influence, so great that it is enough for many men to profess to believe anything when they once find out that Judge Douglas professes to believe it. This man sticks to the decision which forbids the people of a territory from excluding slavery. And he does not do it because he said it's right in itself. He doesn't give any opinion on that. But because it had been decided by the courts. And being decided by the courts, he is, and you are bound, to take in your political action as law.
Give us something besides Dred Scott.
No doubt you do want to hear something that don't hurt. Henry Clay, my beau ideal of a statesman, a man for whom I fought all my humble life, Henry Clay once said of a class of men who would repress all tendency to liberty, that they must if they were to do this, go back to the era of our independence and muzzle the cannon which thunders its annual joyous return. They must blow out the moral lights around us. They must penetrate the human soul and eradicate there the love of liberty. And then, and not until then, could they perpetuate slavery in this country. To my thinking, Judge Douglas is, by his example and vast influence, doing that very thing in this community. When he said that the Negro has nothing in the Declaration of Independence, Henry Clay understood the contrary. Judge Douglas is going back to the era of our Revolution, and to the extent of his ability, muzzling the cannons which thunders its annual joyous return. When he invites the people who have slavery to establish it, he is blowing out the moral lights around us. And when he says he cares not whether slavery be voted down or voted up, he is, in my opinion, penetrating the human soul and eradicating there the light of liberty and the love of reason in this American people. And now, I will only say that when Judge Douglas shall succeed in bringing his public sentiment to the vast and exact accord with his own views, when these vast assemblages shall echo back all these sentiments, and when they shall come to repeat his views and avow his principles, and to say all that he says on the mighty questions, then it only needs the formality of a second Dred Scott decision to make slavery alike lawful in all of the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. My friends, that ends my chapter. Judge Douglas can take his time.
There were no jokes.
Simple. His words so straightforward. He talks to us like a neighbor, not contemptuous and condescending like that little giant.
I guess he spoke true when he handed his coat to a lad on the platform and said, "Hold this while I stone Stephen."
Well, he's got the crowd on his side now. We'll see how Judge Douglas does in his last turn.
This next half hour will give our man time to gain back the ground he's lost.
He hasn't lost ground, Abigail. These simple farm folk forgot all the judge's best arguments. That's all.
Douglas.
Douglas! Douglas! Douglas!
My fellow citizens, I will now occupy the remaining time allotted to me in reply to Mr. Lincoln. The first point which I will call your attention is, as to what I said about the organization of the Republican Party in 1854 and the platform that was formed on the 5th of October that year. And then I will put the question to Mr. Lincoln, whether or not he approves of each article of that platform. Now, I did not charge him with being a member of the committee which reported that platform. I charged that that platform was of the Republican Party, adopted by them. Oh, but Mr. Lincoln now says that although his name was on the committee which reported it, that he does not think he was there, but he thinks he was in Tazewell, holding court. But my friends, this denial of his that he was not on the committee is a miserable quibble to avoid the main issue, which is that this Republican platform declares in favor of the unconditional repeal of the Fugitive Slave Law. Has Mr. Lincoln answered whether he endorses that or not? Oh, I called his attention to it when I first addressed you, and I asked him for an answer. And I then predicted he would not answer. Now, how does he answer? Why, that he was not on the committee that wrote the resolutions which were to restrict slavery in those states in which it exists, and I asked him whether he endorsed it. Did he answer me yes or no? No. He said in reply, "Oh, I was not on the committee at the time. I was up in Tazewell." Now, The next question I put to him was whether he was in favor of prohibiting the admission of any more slave states into the Union. I put the question to him distinctly, whether, if the people of a territory, when they had sufficient population to make a state, should form their constitution recognizing slavery, if he then would vote for or against admission. Now, he is a candidate for the United States Senate, and it is possible, if he should be elected, that he would have to vote directly on that question. Now, I asked him to answer me and you whether he would vote to admit a state into the Union, with or without slavery, as its own people might choose. He did not answer that question. He dodges that question also. He avoids the answer. Now, Mr. Lincoln wants to know why the word state, as well as territory, was put into the Nebraska bill. I will tell him. It was put there to meet just such false arguments as he has been adducing. That first, not only the people of territory should do as they please, but that when they come to be admitted as states, they should come into the Union with or without slavery as the people determine. Now, I meant to knock in the head of this abolition doctrine of Mr. Lincoln's that there should be no more slave states, even if the people wanted them. Now, you see, upon these very points, I am as far from bringing Mr. Lincoln up to the line as I ever was before. He does not want to avow his principles. I do want to avow mine, as clear as sunlight in midday. Democracy is founded upon the eternal principle of right. The plainer these principles are avowed before the people, the stronger will be the support which they will receive. I only wish I had the power to make them so clear that they would shine in the heavens for every man, woman, and child to read. And the first of these principles that I would proclaim would be in opposition to Mr. Lincoln's doctrine of uniformity between the different states. And I would declare instead the sovereign right of every state to decide the slavery question as well as all other domestic questions for themselves, without the interference from any other state or power whatsoever. Now, unless the principle of that doctrine of popular sovereignty is recognized, there will be sectional warfare, agitating and distracting the country. Now, what does Mr. Lincoln propose? He says that the Union cannot exist divided into free and slave states. Well, if it cannot endure thus divided, then he must strive to make them all free or all slave, which will inevitably bring around a dissolution of the Union. Gentlemen, I'm told that my time is out, and I'm obliged to stop.
They seem to feel Lincoln won this one today, but we'll see what develops as these debates go on.
Douglas will have to answer Lincoln's sharp questions at Freeport next week. He'll either lose his Senate seat from Illinois or destroy his chances in the South for the presidency in 1860. Abe outfoxed him there.
I'll admit it was a mistake for the judge to spend so much time in personal attack instead of just sticking to the issues and making his case.
Accusing Lincoln of not supporting our soldiers in the Mexican War didn't care for him, nor did that phony newspaper account of the Nebraska meeting.
I can't wait to read what the Republican newspaper has to say about how things went today.
I'm sure their partisan description will put Douglas in a bad light.
And the Ottawa Free Trader, I hate to admit, will skin Lincoln alive in an equally partisan account.
Well, folks, the crowd's breaking up at last. We have to find a bite to eat and still have chores to do while the light holds.
I feel like we've seen something really important here today, but I just don't know what will come of it all.
I know. This was the first of the 7 debates.
Douglas returned to the Senate, it's true.
But Abe became one of America's greats.
That's what's important to me and to you.
I want to welcome everybody to the Ottawa Lincoln Lookalike Contest. I would like to introduce the judges one by one. We have 4 judges. And, okay. And then we have an advisor. Okay. First judge, and I'm going to like to have this judge stand. First judge is Alice Fredericks. Alice Fredericks. And the second judge, Dorothy Clemens. Third judge, I'm sure nobody knows this one. This is Bill Walsh Sr. And our fourth judge is Larry Keist. And also I would like to introduce Jeanette Walter. She's going to be a judge also. Thank you.
You can sit down now. Okay. I'm going to introduce the criteria that we're going to be judging the contestants with. They're going to be judged, well, of course, the unbearded aren't going to be judged on their beard, but if they're bearded, they will be judged on their beard. They're going to be judged on their height, their costume. They're going to talk a little bit for 2 minutes, and each contestant, and they'll be judged on that also, along with a few other things that are listed with the judges. So, on with the show, and we'll have the presentation of trophies as soon as the 4 unbearded contestants run through here, come up on the stage and make their presentations, and then we'll go on with the bearded Lincolns. So we'll start with the 4 unbearded contestants. And number 1 is Mr. Lloyd Chapman. Lloyd, you want to walk around? You want to show your feathers? And you can talk if you want to.
Is this time for the speech?
Yes. And Bob is sitting, our timekeeper is right behind Bill Walsh. So watch for his.
As a child, watching this beautiful park, Washington Park, meant popcorn wagon over in the corner. It meant Santa Claus at Christmas time. It meant cannons. It meant playing on the tombstones on the monuments here. It meant Christmas lights at Christmas time. It also meant seeing the paintings of Christ at Christmas, which were stationed right here in this park. However, one day I realized these things were symbolic of a greater meaning. They were symbolic of freedoms that I had been taken for granted. They were freely given to me, among which freedom to assemble, freedom of speech and expression. These freedoms, however, had a cost. They were paid in part by the peoples whose names were on these monuments, people I didn't even know. However, these rights and privileges come with responsibilities. Responsibilities to preserve them for future generations as they were for me as a child. It would be a great tragedy if these brave people would have died in vain for this freedom they fought for. Abraham Lincoln said it the best. The world will little note nor remember what we say here today. but it can never forget what these brave veterans did. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which so nobly was advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task of remaining before us, and that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth in freedom, that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Our next unbearded Lincoln lookalike is Doug Fieldman.
I'd like to relate a story about Lincoln's character. An enemy of Lincoln had made some unkind remarks towards Lincoln, and Lincoln responded with only good things to say about it. Later, when he was asked why he didn't go after this man, verbally attack him, Lincoln said, "If I make him my friend, don't I defeat him as an enemy?" And I think this says a lot about Lincoln's character, the ability to overcome his enemies with kindness. He was able to see beyond the situation and take steps towards building a better relationship with this man maybe in the future. He also makes an effort to win the war rather than the battle. And he also showed great self-control and maintained his composure rather than lashing out at his enemy. These are some of the leadership qualities that I think propelled him to becoming one of the great presidents of our country. Thank you.
Our next contestant, Joseph Woodward, comes from Hazeldale, Illinois.
By the way, Mr. Speaker, did you know I'm a military hero? Yes, sir. In the days of the Black Hawk War, I fought and bled and came away. Speaking of General Cass's career reminds me of my own. I was not at Stillman's defeat, but I was about as near it as Cass was to Hull's surrender, and like him, I saw the place very soon afterward. It is quite certain I did not break my sword, for I had none to break. But I bent a musket pretty badly on one occasion. If Cass broke his sword, the idea is he broke it in desperation. I bent the musket by accident. If Cass went in advance of me in picking huckleberries, I suppose I surpassed him in charges upon the wild Indians. And although if he saw any live fighting Indians, it was more than I did, I had a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes. And although I never fainted from loss of blood, I can truly say I was often very hungry. Mr. Speaker, if I should ever conclude to doff whatever our Democratic friends may suppose there is of black cockade federalism about me, and thereupon they shall take me up as their candidate for the presidency, I protest they shall not make fun of me, as they have of General Cass, by attempting to write me into a military hero.
Doug Fieldman.
Our third place winner, Mr. Doug Fieldman. Doug.
Second is Lloyd.
And our second place winner is Mr. Lloyd Chapman. And a stupendous round of applause for our first place winner, Mr. Joseph Woodard.
I'm giving our judge a few minutes to sit down. Bless her heart, she's running back and forth. Okay, number one will be Carl R. Beatty. And Carl is from Grand Ridge, Illinois. Carl?
One day as I was walking along, I was surprised when I came upon a man that stuck a revolver in my face. Trying to remain calm, I said to him, "Sir, what's the matter?" The man replied, "Some years ago, I swore if I ever came across a man other than myself, I would shoot him on the spot." "Shoot me," I said, "for if I'm other than you, I don't want to live." This story is, in my opinion, fitting for the Lincoln Look-alike contest. I would like to welcome all of you to Ottawa's celebration of Lincoln today. We are here to dedicate the statues of Lincoln and Douglas to commemorate the great historical debate, which started right here in Ottawa in August of 1858. This city had the honor of hosting the first of a series of debates which really started Abe Lincoln on the road to the presidency of the United States, for it was these debates that introduced him to the nation. Lincoln has been described as a great, gaunt-looking, friendly man with simple ways and modest air. He loved to tell stories and play practical jokes. He developed a writing and a speaking style completely his own. He tried to put what he wanted to say in a form so that it's simple and that no one could make a mistake in his meaning. He stated his case with exactness, in the fewest words possible, and always with the simplest of terms. Not only did his words appeal to the intellect, but the appeal to the heart was even greater. He had a gift of moving an audience with his words. In fact, during the Lincoln's House Divided speech, the audience was so entranced with what he was saying, reporters forgot to take notes. Even today, the words of Lincoln are appreciated. In the last few days, we have shared in the one-year anniversary of 9/11. On more than one occasion, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address were read or segments quoted. The words he wrote were from the heart, and just as they applied in that day, they apply to the observance of 9/11. Lincoln's words are timeless. Abraham Lincoln desired understanding, acceptance, and justice more than anything else. And the words from his second inaugural address makes this clear. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us finish the work we are in to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who has borne the battle, for his widow and for his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. These are the words to live by even today. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the activities here today in Ottawa.
We're going to limit our speakers to 2 minutes. No, you, George.
Our next contestant flew in this morning from Boston, Massachusetts. George Cheevers. George Cheevers.
Fellow citizens, it's a pleasure to be back in your fair city after 144 years. You've grown with the times, and so have I. These remarks are from a speech I made in Chicago July 10, 1858. We are now a mighty nation of about 30 million people. We run our memory back over the years, and we find a race of men living in that day whom we claim as our fathers and grandfathers. They were iron men. They fought for the principle they were contending for. We have, besides these men, descended by blood from our ancestors. Among us, perhaps half our people who are descendants, who are not descendants at all of these men. They are men who have come from Europe, German, Irish, French, and Scandinavian. Men that have come from Europe themselves or whose ancestors have come hither and settled here, finding themselves our equal in all things. If they look back through this history to trace their connection with those days by blood, they find they have none. They could not carry themselves back into that glorious epoch and make themselves feel that they are of us. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that these old men say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that that moral sentiment, taught in that day, evidences their relation to those men, that it is the father of all moral principle in them, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and so they are. That is the electric cord in the Declaration that links the heart of patriotic and liberty-loving men together, that will link those patriotic hearts as long as the love of freedom exists in the minds of men throughout the world. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And now we have James Conan from Brunswick, Georgia.
I'm humbled by the way I became President of the United States. Back when I was 19 years old, there were 22 states in the Union, 11 free, 11 slave. Maine wanted to join the Union as a free state. That would upset the apple cart with the U.S. senators, so they compromised. They said, okay, Maine, you can join, and we'll let Missouri join as a slave state. That will equalize everything. But they had a stipulation. They said, we're going to take an imaginary line on or around the southern boundary line of Missouri, run it westward through the Louisiana Territory, and no land north of that line will ever be slave territory. About that time, after that, in 1860, a new political party was being formed, the Republican Party, opposed to the expansion of slavery. Stephen Douglas, our U.S. Senator from Illinois, introduced the Lincoln-Nebraska Act, which gave the people north of that line the opportunity to choose for themselves whether that territory would be slave or free. In 1858, I challenged Stephen Douglas for the U.S. Senate. I challenged him to debates. The first debate was made right here on this square. We debated all over Illinois. I got the reputation of being dedicated to stopping the expansion of slavery. Stephen Douglas, I had the support of the people, but the legislature sent Stephen Douglas back to Washington in my stead. In 1860, that Republican Party nominated me as their candidate. The Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas then ran against Breckinridge because the southern states wouldn't go along with it. The Democrats split the Democratic vote. I went in as President of the United States. I never left home. I never politicked. I never met with my running mate. And I won with less than 40% of the vote. And it all started right over yonder on this square in Ottawa, Illinois. Thank you.
Even as I prepared for my first inauguration, dark clouds of discontent on the horizon of my first term as president appeared. With opposition by our citizens of the South against my stand on slavery and threats to divide the Union, my work was cut out for me. To prevent its secession, I sought the help of friends and political colleagues to canvass the South, seeking its patience and begging its temperance in the matter. Afraid of the controversy, many friends of mine refused me. One good friend came to my aid. He toured the North to unite Republicans and Democrats behind me. He toured the South, begging Southerners to stay in the Union. He even won the support of John A. Logan and John A. McClernand, Southern sympathizers who both eventually became Union generals. Only 3 months after my inauguration, exhausted by his valiant efforts, my friend succumbed to fever and died. I wept at his loss and ordered that the White House flag be flown at half-staff. The man who held my hat at my first inaugural speech, the man who escorted Mrs. Lincoln in the Grand March at the inaugural ball, the man who I once described as my best friend in the world, was the same man who helped me carry the mantle to secure the nation's union. You may be surprised to know that that man had earlier been my worthy opponent in the first senatorial debate here in Ottawa. That man was Stephen A. Douglas.
Mr. Don Knoll, Sr. from Marseilles, Illinois, is our next contestant.
As I was passing through here, railroads and canals was quite a travel. And I passed through it many times and stayed here. And out on my way back and forth to Springfield when I was a representative of the state. And I enjoyed this area very much. We had our first debate here. And we had quite a few trials with Mr. Douglas here in LaSalle County, down at the old courthouse and the sheriff's office. And let's see. He had 8 cases here in LaSalle County, and he was against Douglas, and he lost some of them and won some. He was in the Army there at what is now Illinois Valley Community College, was Fort Wilborn at the time. And when they was there, they got to go and come as they wanted and had all the ration stuff that they wanted to have there. Thank you very much.
Our next contestant, Vernon Risty from Arlington Heights, Illinois.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to talk about my acceptance speech at the Republican State Convention. If we could first know where we are and whether we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. We are now far into the 5th year since a policy was initiated, with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to slavery. Under the operation of that policy, that agitation has not only not ceased, but has consistently increased. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slavery and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall. But I do expect that it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in this course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will put it forward till it shall become like lawful in all states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Thank you.
William Wiseman from Vevey, Indiana.
Good morning. My name is Lincoln, Abe Lincoln. My wife calls me Abraham, father sometimes. Oh, on occasion during my political career, I was called a lot of other names that I won't mention. A fellow a while back told me I should repeat a little story to tell about myself. If you hear me cussing, I might say, by jingo. And if I'm a drinking, it might be a spot of tea. And if you hear me, if I go out and get a smoking, if I'm a smoking, dump a bucket of water on me, because I'll be on fire. On leaving Springfield, Illinois, I made a little speech to my neighbors and friends that I love so dearly, the farewell address. My friends, no one not in my situation can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of its people, I owe everything. Here I have lived for a quarter of a century, and I have passed from a young man to an old man. Here my children have been born, and one is buried. I now leave, not knowing when nor whether ever I shall return, with a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington. Without the assistance of that divine being who ever attended him, I cannot succeed. With that assistance, I cannot fail. Trusting in him who can go with me and remain with you and be everywhere for good, let us confidently hope that all will yet be well. I commend you as I hope in your prayers you will commend me. I bid you an affectionate farewell.
Allow me a moment to explain the difference between Judge Douglas and myself on the Kansas-Nebraska bill. Suppose Abraham Lincoln has a beautiful meadow, well fenced, a fine spring of water, and Judge Douglas agrees that Lincoln owns the meadow because originally they had owned all this land in common, but they had divided the land and taken a sacred oath. Now a few years will pass, and Judge Douglas acquires a large herd of cattle, and on his side of the fence there is no green grass, so he looks longingly at Mr. Lincoln's meadow, and he goes down and tears down the fence, exposing Mr. Lincoln's meadow to the ravages of his thirsty cattle. Mr. Lincoln says, "Douglas, what are you doing?" And Douglas will reply, "It is all right, Mr. Lincoln. I have taken down your fence and nothing more. It's my true intent and meaning not to drive my cattle into your meadow, nor to keep them from it. Only they'd be allowed to decide their own direction in their own time." Would not a man who would do something like this be both a knave and a fool? A knave, of course, for taking down the fence which he had solemnly pledged to leave alone, and a fool to believe that anyone would think he hadn't taken down the fence so his cattle could cross over to the other meadow. Now Judge Douglas would have us take down the fence of the Missouri Compromise, but he also have us believe that he cares not whether slavery stays where it is or crosses over to the new territory, only so long as the barrier is removed. But I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, once the barrier is removed, is not the effect the same, regardless of his intent?
Gerald Bestrom from Hastings, Michigan.
Fellow citizens, ladies, gentlemen, honorable guests, and children, now we all didn't come down here to see you, but to allow you to see us. Thank you. However, from our vantage point up here, I believe we have the best of the bargain. Somebody said, "Mr. Lincoln, why are you always telling those anecdotes?" Well, I said it wasn't the story itself that interests me, but the effect. I said the sharpness of a refuser or the edge of a rebuke could be blended by an appropriate story so as to save wounded feelings and yet serve this purpose. Case in point, I was riding to Lewistown with an old weather-beaten farmer. And he was talking about going to law with his next neighbor. I said, how long you known the man? He said, well, 9, 15 years. I said, what? I said, well, part of the time you get along all right. He said, yeah, I reckon. I said, well, see this horse of mine? Sometimes I get out of sorts with him, but I know it's false. Or it might take me a long time to get used to another horse's faults. All horses have faults. I remember in Springfield, somebody had written me a letter. One of the financial holders, one of my acquaintances, which was a businessman. So I wrote him back a letter, and I said, first of all, he has a wife and child which ought to be worth $50,000. And an office in which his desk worth $2.50 and 3 chairs worth $1 each. And last, he has in one corner a large rat hole, which is worth looking into. I remember a little girl in Springfield was skipping along the sidewalk and fell backwards as I came along, and I caught her, picked her up and gently put her down. And I said, what's your name? She said, Mary Tuff. Well, I said, when you reach home, you tell your mother you rested in Abraham's bosom. So I want to thank you all for a magnificent welcome, and I bid you an affectionate farewell.
I'd like to make this statement that our Mr. Beestrom, we just finished, will be playing the saw for everybody's benefit here shortly, so be sure, look out for him. Our next contestant is Ralph Borer, Holland, Ohio. Ralph Borer.
In 1842, a young couple came to visit me at the executive mansion. The young lady asked me if she might take a trip down to see the troops trained for the Civil War. And I said, that's a reasonable request. I'll do that. So I arranged for her and some other people, a minister there, to make that trip down to see the troops trained. As they were making that trip down to watch the troops that day, she heard some people singing. And she turned to the minister that day and she said, whoa, I really like that song, but I hate the words. And he looked at her and he said, ma'am, if you don't like the words, why don't you write some good ones? She didn't think much more about it, finished her trip down, and came back to Washington, D.C. that night, retired in the hotel, woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning with all these words running around in her mind. And she told me she got up, searched for an old pencil that she had, and wrote those words down, every last one of them. Next morning, she got up and read those words and thought they sounded pretty good. Thought she might send them off to Atlantic Monthly Magazine. They printed those words, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and paid her an astronomical sum of $5 for that. Now the story doesn't end there. That preacher was later captured and returned back to Washington. When I went to see them, they sang that song, and I said, stand up and sing that great song one more time. Thank you.
Louis Claymore, Vandalia, Illinois.
This celebration at Ottawa, coming so close on the anniversary of the 9/11, reminds me of the Gettysburg and the brave soldiers there. And the same thing applies. We have come here, we hereby highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a rebirth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish,
from the earth. Thank you.
Our next contestant I call Ageless Abe. This is Bud Green from Versailles, Missouri.
I'm from Missouri, but I was born in Illinois, not too far northeast of here. My parents were both born in Illinois. My grandparents were married in a little town just a little bit southeast of here. So I'm not a stranger to Illinois. Now, as Lincoln, you will notice that my linen suit is wrinkled. The press has been very hard on me. They have criticized my appearance, my clothing. Why, they even say that I sleep in my clothing. And I don't deny it. I have a couch at the War Department, and I spend more nights on that couch than I do in my own bed. Would I not look silly wandering around the War Department in my nightshirt? Thank you.
Cliff Howard from Frankfort, Kentucky.
In my first inaugural address, I said that the mystic chords of memory will once again swell the chorus of union when touched as surely they must be by the better angels of our nature. Well, it took a long time for those angels to touch people like me, Jefferson Davis, but 23 years after the war was over, in a speech in Mississippi City, Mississippi, I said this: the past is dead. Let the dead bury their dead. But as for you, put aside your rancor and your bitter feelings and join with those who are about to accomplish something that must be a reunited country. Thank you.
Friends, as we gather here today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a few things that are where fact is stranger than fiction. I'd like to present a few of those facts to you at this time. The comparison of my life against John Fitzgerald Kennedy. You see, my name, Lincoln, contains 7 letters. The name Kennedy contains 7 letters. I was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. I was involved with a civil rights issue, and Kennedy was involved with a civil rights issue. I had a child to die while I served as president, and Kennedy had a child to die while he served as president. I had an advisor whose name was Kennedy, and Kennedy had a secretary whose name was Lincoln. I was advised not to go to the theater. Kennedy was advised not to go to Dallas. I was assassinated on Friday. Kennedy was assassinated on Friday. My assassin fired from a theater and then fled to a warehouse. Kennedy's assassin fired from a warehouse and fled to a theater. The name of my assassin, John Wilkes Booth, contains 15 letters. The name of Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, contains 15 letters.
I was succeeded by my vice president, whose name was Johnson, and Kennedy was succeeded by his vice president, whose name was Johnson. Thank you.
Eugene Slider from Fayette, Iowa.
I've been a Lincoln presenter since 1973. I drive a Lincoln car. My license plate says old Abe because I'm over 70. My truck I have at home has got Abe 2 plates on. I go to schools when they ask me. I always dress up go to church on February the 12th. I'm not a public speaker. Thank you.
All of these contestants from out of LaSalle County belong to the Abraham Lincoln Presenters, and part of their goal here is those people is to get those persons from LaSalle County that are present here acting as Lincoln to be part of the Abraham Lincoln Presenters. Our next contestant is from Ottawa. He's got to join. Dr. Dirk Steinert.
I have no speech, and neither did Lincoln was very short on his speeches, so that is all I have to say.
Mark Lippard from Spring Valley, Illinois. Jim R. Duffer from Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Fellow citizens, having become a candidate for the honorable office of one of your representatives, the next General Assembly of this state, in accordance with an established custom and the principles of true republicanism, it becomes my duty to make known to you the people whom I propose to represent my sentiments in regards to local affairs. Every man is said to have his peculiar ambition. Whether it be true or not, I can say for one that I have no other so great as that of being truly esteemed of my fellow men, by rendering myself worthy of their esteem. How far I shall succeed in gratifying this ambition is yet to be developed. I am young and unknown to many of you. I was born and have ever remained in the most humble walks of life. I have no wealthy or popular relations to recommend me. My case is thrown exclusively upon the independent voters of this county, and if elected, they will have conferred a favor upon me, for which I shall be unremitting in my labors to compensate. But if the good people in their wisdom shall see fit to keep me in the background, I have been too familiar with disappointments to be very much chagrined. Thank you.
One of our goals in Ottawa is to have, in a few years, the Abraham Lincoln Presenters Convention here. And I predict we will have at least 50 Abraham Lincolns and 25 Mary Todd Lincolns. And that's part of the goal of what I'm so happy that we're able to show you what these gentlemen are like. And that annual convention is booked up for 2 or 3 years hence, so we have to look forward to Robert Sharp from Rock Falls, Illinois.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Some time ago, I took a trip down the river in a barge with a load of pigs. And while I was down there, I saw along the shores and in those places, people being treated like animals. They call them slaves. And I said to myself then that if ever I get a chance to hit this thing and hit it hard, I'm going to do it. On April 6, 1859, Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter to Henry L. Price. He said, "This is a world of compensation, and he who would be no slave must consent to have no slave. Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves, and under a just God cannot long retain it." Then I spoke to the Indianapolis Regiment in 1865, and I said these remarks. I have always thought that all men should be free. But if any should be slaves, it should be first those who desire it for themselves, and secondly, those who desire it for others. Whenever I have a chance to argue this thing and to free those people, I will do it. I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on everyone that has slaves. Again, if I ever get a chance to hit this thing hard, and it looks like my chance may come, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to hit it hard. Thank you.
Mr. Larry Gibbons from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Good afternoon. You know, during the Civil War, there were so many killed, so many wounded. And as president, so often I would go out in the hospitals around Washington, D.C. there, visiting the young soldiers. And I remember one day going into a hospital, and I went up to the bed of one of the young soldiers. He was just a young boy. And I said, "Son, how are you doing?" He said, "Oh, sir, not well at all, not well at all." And I said, "Well, son, where are you from?" He said, "Well, I'm from Indiana." I said, "Indiana? Why, I grew up there myself. Son, is there anything I can do to help you?" And he said, "Sir, could you write a letter to my mom and papa? Since I've been wounded, I can't write." And I said, "Well, I'll be glad to, son." And I got a piece of paper and a pen, and as he spoke, I wrote, "Dear Mama and Papa, I had to write and tell you that I've been so seriously wounded in battle, and I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but I wanted you to know how much I love you, and I wanted you to know how proud I am to be serving my country in this war. Please give Mary and Johnny my love. Your loving son, Robert." And underneath I wrote, "Written by A. Lincoln." And I handed it to him, and he looked at it, and he said, Are you the president? Are you Mr. Lincoln?" I said, "Yes, son, I am. Is there anything else I can do to help you?" And he said, "Mr. Lincoln, could you just sit here by my side and hold my hand for a while?" And I said, "Son, after all that you've done, after all that you've given this country, it would be an honor." And I sat down and held his hand. As I sat there, suddenly he died. And at that moment, I realized that this terrible, horrible Civil War that we were engaged in was robbing us, was robbing our country of the greatest asset that it has, our young men. And I got a burden on my heart, and I still have that burden today. Thank you.
Let's have a big round of applause for all of these wonderful, wonderful Lincolns. We salute you. Wonderful.
On to the winners. May I please welcome to front and center stage Mr. James Conine, from Brunswick, Georgia, our contestant, and he is our winner in the category placing fifth. Congratulations, James. We're proud of you. Each of them in their own rights is a winner, but we do have to make selections, do we not? Then I would like to welcome to the stage, front and center, contestant George Cheevers. And George is from Boston, Massachusetts. Boston. Congratulations, George. And he receives the 4th place trophy. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And then please give a warm welcome to Max Daniels from Wheaton, Illinois, who receives our 3rd place trophy. Max. And please give a warm welcome to, from Vevey, Indiana, Mr. William Wiseman, our number 2 place contestant.
The last contestant wants me to tell you that it's pronounced his city, Vivi, Indiana. Right.
We all learn something every day, do we not? Thank you for that bit of information. And then, may we please announce our number 1 place winner, and Bill is ready with that wonderful trophy for Gerald Bestrom from Hastings, Michigan. Yes.
This is wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
No speech, Joe.
Hold us right up there, okay.
Well, let's say this is a real honor.
Thank you, Joe.
And there are some that just spoke would like to have it.
Thank you very much, Joe.
But there's no greater honor than to portray one of the greatest presidents our nation has ever known. Because he is governed by moral integrity. I was on the radio in this local area the other day, and I said, you know, when he gave his first Lincoln Douglas debates, of those 70 debates, he kept telling Senator Douglas, nothing is politically right, which is morally wrong, and he held his ground. So I just praise God for the opportunity he's given to me, and it's an honor to have this trophy, and some great things are ahead. But the greatest thrill is to have a relationship. Thank you very much. And thank you, Lincoln.
I need to make an announcement. Were you going to
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Lincoln Douglas Debate Memorial Plaza dedication. You were summoned to attention by the Ottawa Township High School Band under the direction of Ms. Sarah Reckmeyer. We'd like to begin the ceremonies today with the posting of the colors. To do that, we have the American Legion Post 33, VFW Post 2470 Color Guard, and the 104th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Dr. Harry Spell, who will lead us with the Ottawa High School Band in the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
If I had known that, I would have turned off the microphone. I'd now like to introduce the Reverend John Meyer from the First United Methodist Church of Ottawa to lead us in the invocation.
Let us pray. Gracious and eternal God, creator of all things seen and unseen, we ask that your light may shine upon us as we dedicate this Lincoln Douglas Plaza. Send your blessing upon our city and national and world leaders. Send your blessing upon the planning committee, the designers of the plaza, she who created the statues, he who cast them, and all who labored to make this memorial a reality. Bless also all who contributed to this project with their gifts, their labor, and their loving support. As we dedicate these statues, this fountain, and this plaza, may each of us dedicate our lives to the causes of freedom and national unity that were the themes of the debate we memorialize today. May each of us dedicate our lives to the principle that all people are created equal, so that someday all God's children may walk in this park and in this city and in this nation and world as people who are free, who receive and give justice, who are respected by themselves and others, and may live in peace. For none of God's children are truly free until all God's children are truly free. None are truly receive justice until all receive justice. None of God's children are truly respected until all God's children are truly respected, and there is no peace until all God's children live in peace. Hear us this day as we pray to you, O holy God, in the name of the Christ. Amen.
I'd like to quickly introduce, and it looks like maybe things will clear up, I'd like to quickly introduce to you the people on stage here, our honored guests. Beginning to my left, first we have Professor David Zarefsky from Northwestern University, Professor and former U.S. Senator Paul Simon, we have some of all of our city commissioners, Commissioner Wayne Eichelkraut, Commissioner Daphne Mitchell, Commissioner Ed Whitney, and at the very end, Commissioner Randy Constantine. Also, our state representatives in Springfield, Senator Patrick Welch and Representative Frank Martino. On my right in the front row, next to Reverend Meyer, is Patty Godfrey, chairman of the Ottawa Historic Preservation Commission. Lupe O'Leary, also a member of that commission and the chairman of our Year of Lincoln events. And Preservation Commissioners Joyce Lyons, Peggy Martin, Carl Heron, and Keith Johnson. Next to Keith is Edmund B. Thornton of the Edmund B. Thornton Foundation. Edmund has a long history with this park. He helped get the park and the entire square on the National Register of Historic Places. He's been a member and chairman of the National Heritage Canal Corridor Commission, Edmund Thornton. Back over to my left, closest to me is from Springfield, our state archivist, Dr. Dr. Wayne Temple. I talked to him for 2 hours last night. Dr. Temple. LaSalle County Board Chairman Joe Heddle. And one of our main contributors, the Walsh Automotive Group, represented by Bill Walsh Jr. and Bill Walsh Sr. Another one of our primary contributors, Larry Keiss, the Performance Pipelining. Larry's grandfather was Dave Morgan, who for many years was the old Abe who ran the popcorn wagon in the park here. And I'm missing a representative from Ottawa Savings Bank. If you're in the crowd, please come up. Over to my right in the back row, you've already heard Harry Spell. Not only is he a great singer, but he and his wife Carly, who should be up here and is in the front row out there, were the casters who cast the beautiful statues you're about to soon see. Seated next to Harry is one of the most talented and lovely artists, I think, in the world. And you'll soon see what I mean when the statues are unveiled. Rebecca Childers Khalil. And from the State Department of Commerce and Community Affairs, representing the Tourism Division, Lynn Young, who represents Pam McDonough, and also representing Governor and Mrs. Ryan. Lynn? We also have some special guests who are not on stage, and they're seated down here in front, and I'd just like them to stand collectively. They're groups of organizations that have somehow been involved with this project, either as having led the way for us, or, you know, I always say one good thing leads to another. The first group I'd like to recognize is the Reddick Mansion Association, which not only runs the mansion, but which was active also in getting this place listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Would the members of the Reddick Mansion Association please stand? Okay. The Ottawa Visitor Center Board, would you folks please stand? And a committee that's just begun its work about a year ago and is going to leave a lasting impression on the community, the Brush with History Mural Committee. Would the LaSalle County Board members who are present please stand? The LaSalle County Board provided grants for the statues in the plaza. Do we have any members from the Illinois Michigan Canal National Heritage Corridor Commission? Professor Conson, I know. Okay, thank you. And the Canal Corridor Association? Okay. The Heritage Corridor Convention and Visitors Bureau? Okay. The Illinois Humanities Council? The Illinois Humanities Council provided the grant for the Lincoln Conference that was held yesterday. The Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, the Springfield, Illinois Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Pass City Council, and they are, I don't know who, they're all here, Forrest Buck, Bill Stevenson, Bob Jameson, and Bill Walsh. It was the last council that actually approved the first expenditure for this project and made the commitment to proceed. Do we have any members from the Kendall County Historic Preservation Board here? Okay, well that's it for special guests. I'd now like to introduce Patty Godfrey. Patty has been a pillar of strength and unlimited positive attitude during this 7-year process to create the Lincoln Douglas Debate Memorial Plaza. During most of that time, Patty has served as the chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission, and she would just like to make a few comments about commission members.
Thank you. I just want to make this a little bit personal. My grandmother always said if it rains, it brings good luck. And another thing, today would be my father's 95th birthday. And I've been chairman of this committee since 1998, and I've been on the committee since 1994. And the mayor has also been on the committee since 1994. It started out being monthly meetings, but the last 2 years we've had weekly meetings. And Bob, with our ups and downs, has been our positive inspiration. Thank you, Bob. Please, I'm going to start alphabetically with my devoted volunteer committee. Carl Heron, you're first. Carl was in charge of the reenactment debate today, that we had this morning. And he has also been our contact person with Harry Spell, who did the anthem for us, and his wife, Carly, the casters from Oregon, Illinois. He also has done a nice job of fundraising. Thank you, Carl. Keith Johnson is next. Keith is our popcorn wagon chairman. He keeps that going. And Keith is a previous City of Ottawa commissioner. And I'm proud to say that Keith made the molds for the restoration of the beautiful Reddick Mansion wrought iron fence right across the way. And he's also very active in the Riverwalk project. Joyce Lyons. Joyce has been our faithful secretary. And some of our meetings become very disjointed, but she keeps us on track. She has also gathered all of the recipes for the cookbook we're selling today at the very low price of $10. And it has a lot of his old historical pictures of Ottawa, as well as good recipes. Mike Wagan, a new member of our committee, was a big help on construction ideas, and he couldn't be here today. Peggy Martin. What can I say? We had 2 proposals from our committee for statues, and Peggy was on our committee, and she said she'd like to try to come up with a plan. When she presented it, we all knew right away it was what we wanted. I want you to know that Peggy is a very, very busy licensed architect and has donated all of her long, hard work and time, no charge, for this project, and you'll soon see it. Lupe O'Leary is next, and Lupe moved back to Ottawa several years ago and retired from teaching in California. She called me as we graduated together from OHS, and she said, I'd sort of like to get involved in some historic volunteer project. Well, it just so happened that we had an opening on the commission, and so the mayor appointed her to the committee, and she was just what we needed. She is very organized and puts everything in black and white. And it is a pleasure to me, it was a pleasure to me to make her chairman of the Year of Lincoln, Lupe O'Leary.
Thanks, Patty. I'm feeling a little emotional right now, but as a native Ottawan, I'm feeling humble, but yet very, very proud to be part of this historic event. For it is a historic event, the unveiling of these beautiful, magnificent statues. I also want to take the opportunity to thank you, the community, because collectively, this community made this project possible. from the Jeep tickets that were bought, from the $50, the $100, and the big donors. Collectively, we did this together. And I think that you, as a community, should feel very proud because these magnificent statues and fountains belong to you and the generations that will come after all of us. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of this project. I feel privileged to have been able to work with them. Mayor Bob Eschbach. Bob had a vision, he had a mission, and most of all, a determination to complete this project. He worked tirelessly to get the job done. At the same time, I'd like to acknowledge Patty Godfrey, the chairperson of this Historic Preservation Commission. Patty was determined and has shared the same vision. If an obstacle got in front of us, Patty would find a way to go over it, under it, through it, but we were going to get this project done. And I'm so happy to have had this opportunity to work with you. Thank you very much. I'm going to get emotional. Thank you.
Thank you, Lupe. There are two things that came out of this commission. We all agreed that it was the most rewarding committee or commission or board we'd ever worked on. The other thing they've all told me is after the ceremony there's going to be a mass resignation, and they're through for a while. Now I hope that's not the case, and I'm not sure I'm going to let them resign, but that's what I've been told. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to share with you a letter I received a few days ago from the United States Department of Interior National Park Service from the director, Fran Manella. He writes, personally and on behalf of the National Park Service, I am pleased to commend your efforts and that of the citizens of Ottawa to commission these magnificent bronze sculptures and erect them in Washington Square, the site of the first Lincoln-Douglas debate. I recognize the fact that Washington Square is part of an historic district and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Lincoln-Douglas debates, the first of which was held on August 21st, 1858 in your city, framed the major political arguments of the day and the moral issues of slavery. A grateful nation acknowledges the contribution made by these two historic figures and the resolution of the political question of slavery that gave freedom to millions of Americans and has now united a nation. My compliments to you and the citizens of Ottawa for your effort to commemorate this important historic event. I wish you well and extend best wishes to all assembled. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor David Zarefsky as our first speaker. Professor Zarefsky has been a member of the faculty of the School of Speech at Northwestern University since 1968 and has been the dean since 1988. Professor Zarefsky was the Van Zeiss Research Professor of Communication at Northwestern University in 1984 and 85, conducting research on the 7 Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. The author of numerous publications in rhetorical history and criticism, argumentation, and forensics, Mr. Zarefsky was the recipient of the 1989 Distinguished Service Award from the American Forensic Association, a national professional organization for speech and debate instructors. Professor Zarefsky received his PhD in Communication Studies from Northwestern University in 1974. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. David Zarefsky.
Thank you very much. Mayor Eschbach, Senator Simon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's a personal pleasure to become reacquainted with Bob Eschbach after a lapse of 33 years. It's an honor to share this platform with Senator Simon, and I want particularly to congratulate you, the people of Ottawa, for your generous support and dedication, which has made this Memorial Plaza possible. It was at this same time, 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and in this same place, Washington Square Park, a little over 144 years ago, that Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas met in the first of their 7 joint debates during the Senate campaign of 1858.
it's worth our reminding ourselves how unusual an event this was. To begin with, remember, senators were not elected at that time by direct popular vote, but by the state legislature. So the normal practice would have been to have campaigns for all of the individual legislative seats, and only after the legislature had been chosen and seated would attention turn to the question of the selection of a U.S. senator. But in 1858, the new Illinois Republican Party had taken the unusual step of holding a convention at which Abraham Lincoln delivered the House Divided speech, a convention which resolved that Lincoln was the first, last, and only choice for the Senate seat then occupied by Stephen A. Douglas. And the fact that that happened, in turn, was the result of another very unusual circumstance in that year, and it involved Senator Douglas, a very prominent national Democrat, the chair of the Senate Committee on Territories. He had taken the unusual step of breaking with the president of his own party, President James Buchanan. Buchanan had supported the Lecompton Constitution for Kansas, under which Kansas would have come into the Union as a slave state. Douglas opposed it, not so much because it was pro-slavery, but because it clearly did not represent the view of the majority of the settlers of Kansas. Douglas championed popular sovereignty, the right of the people of the territory to decide whether they would be slave or free. And by 1858, it was pretty clear that popular sovereignty, if carried out, would produce just about the same result that Lincoln was arguing for, that is, slavery would very likely have been kept out of the territories. And for that reason, some prominent Republicans in the East were urging that the Illinois Republicans not oppose Douglas for re-election because Douglas could be a real aid to the Republican cause. But the state party was not convinced. They didn't trust Douglas, first of all, and they didn't want to pass up the opportunity for one of their own to be elected. And so they held the convention and passed that resolution. Douglas, however, was far more known than Lincoln, and Lincoln had the usual problem of the political underdog of how to attract crowds. And so he took to the device of following Douglas around, and Douglas would speak and Lincoln would be in the audience, and then Lincoln would get up and invite the audience to remain or to come back after supper or to come back the next day, and he would address them. He was beginning to be ridiculed for this practice. In fact, one of the highly partisan Democratic newspapers said that if Lincoln really wanted to attract a crowd, he should join up with one of the circuses that was traveling around the state. And so Abraham Lincoln, after consulting with advisors, challenged Stephen A. Douglas to a series of debates, over 50 of them, which would enable him to share the platform with the incumbent senator. But of course, if that challenge had been accepted, Douglas would have had to spend virtually the whole campaign debating Lincoln, and he would have had to renege on all the speaking commitments he had already made. And so Douglas counter-proposed. He said there are 9 congressional districts in this state. We've both recently spoken in Chicago, that's 1. We've both recently spoken in Springfield, that's 2. I'll meet you for 1 joint debate in each of the other 7 counties. There was backing and forthing, a debate about the debates not unlike what take place today, whether this really was accepting Lincoln's challenge or not, who got the advantage out of the deal, but finally Lincoln accepted Douglas's proposal and they agreed to a series of 7 debates. According to the Chicago Press and Tribune, by 8 o'clock in the morning of August 21st, the day of that first debate, Ottawa was enveloped with dust as citizens from this and surrounding counties made their way to Washington Square. Some 12,000 people in all would gather here where, unaided by amplification, they would attempt to listen to the first of the joint debates. Lincoln and Douglas both got here about noon. Lincoln took the train from Morris to the east. Douglas came in by carriage from Peru to the west. And at 2:30, they ascended the platform and began the first of those joint debates of the state of Illinois. And most of those arguments that would find resonance later in that campaign, that would find resonance in the speeches and debates of 1859 and in the presidential campaign of 1860, started right here in Washington Square in Ottawa on August the 21st. And so it is fitting and proper, as Lincoln once said, that we memorialize this occasion as you have chosen to do, with these beautiful sculptures that will be the hallmark of this very special place. And it's a great pleasure for me to share this day with you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to now introduce the Ottawa Township High School Jazz Choir under the direction of Mr. Roger Am. We're going to be singing their rendition of This Is My Country. For those of you who are not from Ottawa, and everybody else knows what I'm going to say, Ottawa High School's band and choir have been state champions, Illinois state champions, for the last 6 years in a row. And as you have heard and as you will hear, you'll know why. Folks, I'd like you to take a moment to look at your program, and on the back there's a big thank you for the major contributors to this project. Since the program went to press, there were 3 more contributors that needed to be placed in that category. I would just like to name them now, recognize them now. They are Vigors and Sarver and Associates, United Auto Workers Pat Greathouse Educational Center, and our local corporation, MBL. And even though these large contributions were necessary to make this project happen, there were really thousands of contributions of all sizes and all sorts. Some of them weren't monetary, some of them were people pitching in, doing some work. Mr. Whitney, who made the signs that you see at the park, that was all done by volunteers. And I'm not going to start to name them because there were so many. But there were also young people. You'll remember that we talked at a city council meeting about Dylan Coca from Lyons, Illinois, who sent his allowance to the city of Ottawa. How he found us, I don't know, of $3. And the Wallace School kids who made buttons and sold them at a fundraiser and sent in a check for $106. And the Lincoln School Thinking About Lincoln Club. It was a summer reading club that sent us $36, and my notes say 123 cents. I don't know what that means exactly, but all right. And of course, all of you who made a contribution in any way whatsoever, we say thank you, and we hope you feel that you have a stake in the ownership of this magnificent project. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Wayne Temple. I'm kind of jealous of Dr. Temple because he gets to introduce Rebecca Childers Khalil. And as you've already noticed, we all have a particular fondness for Rebecca. Dr. Temple was a particular comfort and encouragement to the committee because we really were chartering new ground, and nobody had ever done a project like this in Ottawa before. And Dr. Temple, beginning about 2.5 years ago, I think, started making contact with us and encouraging us to go forward and telling us we were doing the right thing and telling us we had the right artist. And it was great comfort and inspiration to us all. This time I'd like to introduce Dr. Wayne Temple.
I would like to thank Mayor Eschbach for all the kindnesses and courtesies that he has, and his entire staff has given to me and my wife, even sending us detailed maps so that we could get to our bed and breakfast here in town and anything. And before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge Senator Simon, who has also written a fabulous book on Lincoln and the Illinois legislature, which is still in print. And not many can say that it's still in print. I have one better, though, I think, Senator. Before anybody knew I was a Lincoln person, but I was, the State Museum asked me to do the history of the Indians of Illinois, which I finally did in 1958. It's still in print. No other idiot is ever going to attempt it, I don't think. But anyhow, in 1999, I received a call from the sculptor, and she said somebody had recommended that I might be able to help her with the details for a heroic size Lincoln and Douglas for your beautiful Washington Square. And I think she may have forgotten who that was, and I don't know. But anyhow, that's how this started. And I told her that of the many Lincoln statues around the world, the only ones that I find acceptable would fit on your two hands and have a finger or two to spare. And some of those that received great recognition for first, second, third, or fourth attempt, the rest of their works were terrible. The thing that I had learned from Dr. Lloyd Ostendorf, that I began doing consulting work for him, free of charge, of course. Being a state employee, Senator, you know how that goes. We don't dare charge for anything. And beginning in 1958, I did the research for Dr. Lloyd Ostendorf, who had that great knack. And he used to come to Springfield all the time, and I did research for him and so forth. And he pointed out to me one day something that I passed on to the sculptor, if she hadn't already seen it. Lloyd said, "Take a good look at Lincoln's face." And I looked, and he said, "It's not symmetrical. And those that do not recognize that are doomed to failure, because they may not realize it, but when they finish, it doesn't look like Lincoln, and that's the reason." And you may test that out. So the sculptor and I began research, and before I forget it, I want to thank the two people in the audience here. Any of you that have ever been in such a project, and I see that many of you have, without the support of your spouse, it's practically helpless and hopeless. So I'd like to thank Dr. George Khalil for his support of the sculptor. And stand up, doctor. Yeah, that's right, yeah, yes.
And my wife, Sundarine, who is an interpreter at the old state capitol, and she knows a thing or two about Lincoln also, and there's things that I haven't thought about and she would think of. Well, anyhow, I told the sculptor when we started we were going to make her work the finest there was in the world. And to do that, we needed all the exact details, and it's been my field of study since 1949, and I sort of knew where the sources were. And Dr. Gabor Borat is not here. He's a member of the National Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission. And I might say that I had the honor to be appointed to their advisory committee just a couple of weeks ago, so I'll be working with them too. And Dr. Gabor Borat had several years ago been approached by a lady who had the actual drawing of Lincoln's feet by his bootmaker while he was in the White House. And she asked Dr. Borat if he thought that that was valuable in any way. Lincoln was always complaining about his feet, and the boots didn't fit him. So the bootmaker heard about this and went to Washington. He had Lincoln's in his stocking feet stand on paper, and he drew around Lincoln's feet and took measurements at the arch and the height and everything else, and his cryptic messages were encoded on his drawings. And then, as the proof of the pudding, he had Lincoln between the two drawings sign his name and date it. There's no doubt about the authenticity. So the sculptor and I knew exactly what Lincoln's feet were. And what would you guess? Before, we've always just guessed about what his size were. We knew they were large. But with the drawings, we knew that he wore size 13 boot. And in the Civil War days, there was no left or right boot. Square-toed, and you could wear either foot in either boot. So, you there. And we wanted them to be square-toed like the original were. And Robert Lincoln, the president's son, said that his father always wore boots, not shoes, and he was very particular about them. And well, he should be with his foot trouble and bunions bothering him. So the sculptor was able that way to do the ratio and proportion to get the boots on Lincoln the exact size. I discovered when F.B. Carpenter was living for 6 months in the White House to paint Lincoln's reading of the Emancipation Proclamation to the cabinet. And Carpenter was fairly good, but not as good as some of the other painters. But anyhow, he tried, and he not only got photographs of all the members of the cabinet taken at his expense, but he stood Lincoln up against the wall in his stocking feet, and he measured him. And he wrote in his diary that Lincoln stood exactly 6 feet 3 3/4 inches. And I can prove that's right because Lincoln, in writing a little autobiographical sketch, said, "If any personal description me is necessary, you might say that I am 6 feet 4 nearly." Lincoln knew that 1/4 of an inch, too. He was very exact, very scientific. So we know his exact height, and the sculptor immediately, of course, got a hold of a cast of Leonard Wells Volk's life mask, which was done in Chicago in 1860, and Lincoln's hands, which he came down to Springfield and cast his hands. Very few sculptors ever use the life mask. Why? I can't understand. I can't understand that. It's my privilege to own the first casting from the original casting of Lincoln's life mask taken February the 12th, 1865. Douglas, on the other hand, is standing there very adamant. He's mad as he could be about Lincoln's comments, and so you'll see that on his face. I shouldn't diminish the value of the statue of Douglas because she has caught him exactly. The little bulldog is exactly like he was in life. So just because Lincoln became president, we should look at both statues and see how wonderfully they are done. They're heroic size and done to perfection, and the world will be a path here to see this is the statue of Lincoln particularly has never been equaled, I think. And I'll close with just a little remark. There are some religions, and I don't know if any of you here adhere to those, that believe that the sovereign grand architect of the universe sometimes sends figures of great heroic proportions back to this earth in the shape of current human beings. My wife wife and I have visited Italy at least twice, for 2 weeks at a time. We've been to all the studios, and we fell in love with that great sculptor, as you pronounce his name, Michelangelo Buonarroti, and the Italians call him Michelangelo. And it is my opinion that if you adhere to that religion, that the great sovereign architect has returned Michelangelo to this sculptor. And you know, this is the era of the woman. So if he was going to send back, Michelangelo. He didn't do it to a man. He did it to your sculptor. And I think there's only one difference that I could tell. She has his great genius, his great ability, and his stick-to-itiveness. I checked her nose one time at a respectable distance, and I noted that it had never been broken. And so that's one fallacy that the sovereign grand architect, if he ever makes mistakes, did make a mistake, because Buonarroti had a broken nose from a fight he had had when he was a young man with one of his colleagues. So other than that, Rebecca has all of Michelangelo's talents. So my privilege to present to you Rebecca Childress Khalil.
I don't know if that was me he was talking about. Thank you, Dr. Temple. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the people who made this project a success. Dr. Wayne Temple, Chief Deputy Director of the Illinois State Archives. As you know, he's been my advisor for the last 3 years. Dr. Harry and Carly Spell, owners of Art Casting of Illinois, the foundry responsible for this excellent casting that you're about to see. Mayor Robert Ishbach and the Historic Preservation Commission for giving me the opportunity to recreate this historic debate. I would also like to thank my friends and my family for giving me the love and support, and all of you for coming out to celebrate this unveiling. Thank you.
Speaking of the era of the woman, and I've already introduced two of them up here who meant so much to this project, I would like to make a comment about someone else. Tip O'Neill once said, the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill once said, "The devil is in the detail." And Mies van der Rohe said it a different way, a little bit more eloquently. He said, "God is in the details." And if there ever were a detail person who made this project work, it was Peggy Martin. And Peggy, we all love you. We all wish we had $1 for every hour of sleep you lost. And we thank you for all of the work in not only the design of this plaza, but in acting as the construction manager for the plaza, working with all the contractors, making sure that it happened. Almost 1 year ago to the day, the people of this community initiated a year-long celebration of our Lincoln legacy. The purpose of this Year of Lincoln, as we called it, was to encourage citizens to learn of the Lincoln connection with Ottawa, raise awareness and appreciation for Lincoln as a leader, and to encourage pride in the community where Lincoln walked and talked. The Year of Lincoln was to build up to this grand finale, if you will, that being the dedication of the Lincoln-Douglas Debate Memorial Plaza in this square. A grand event was planned for the kickoff of the Year of Lincoln, featuring a patriotic concert by our Illinois Valley Symphony Orchestra here in this park. Then, just days before this scheduled event, the September 11th terrorist attacks shocked the nation and the world. This Year of Lincoln kickoff celebration suddenly became a somber event, in part a memorial service for those who perished in the attacks of that day. We honored the firefighters, the police officers, and emergency personnel who saved so many and who gave of their own lives in such horrific numbers. And we also honored our own heroes in this community. In a stirring armed services medley, veterans young and not so young of the various branches of the armed services stood at attention as their respective songs were played. Anchors aweigh for the Navy veterans, Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder for the Air Force veterans, and so forth. And there was hardly a dry eye in the whole park. That day in the park, we turned to Abraham Lincoln and to that ultimate memorial speech, the Gettysburg Address, for instruction and inspiration. We wanted to find a way to reason and conclude that all of these deaths had not been in vain. And looking to Lincoln, we rededicated ourselves to a new birth of freedom, as he said, to do all in our power as a people to see to it that this noble experiment and experience of democracy not perish from the earth. This rededication, I think, had much to do with the success of the Lincoln-Douglas Debate Plaza project. That the people of this community contributed almost $400,000 for this project is not only a testament to their incredible generosity, but an understanding of the importance of Lincoln in our city and our nation's history. Ironically, the statues of Lincoln and Douglas arrived in Ottawa and were erected here this past Wednesday, September 11th, the one-year anniversary of the terrorist attacks on the nation. It wasn't planned that way. In fact, the statues were to have been delivered the previous Wednesday, but the plaza and the statues weren't quite ready. And as you all know, we don't give ourselves a lot of wiggle room in this project. So, as in New York, Governor Pataki was reciting the Gettysburg Address, and as the Gettysburg Address was being read at probably thousands of memorial services across the nation, a grand bronze statue of our nation's greatest leader, a Statue of Liberty, was being placed on that platform in this square. I think I speak for the Preservation Commission members, the artists, and all those involved in this project, that there was not any place in the world we would have rather been that day than here in Washington Square. In closing, I would like to share with you something that happened just 2 days ago, this past Thursday morning. The sun had been up only a few hours, and in the park we were just about to drape the statues of Lincoln and Douglas for the unveiling, when a group of students from St. Patrick's Grade School walked into the park. Mrs. Novak's 8th grade class had come to see Abe Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. At that moment, I knew this project was a success. I have no doubt that in the months and years to come, hundreds of teachers and thousands of parents will bring their students and children to this memorial. That this plaza will not only be a great public place to experience magnificent sculpture and to enjoy a beautiful fountain, but that it will become a teaching tool, that it will inspire young and old to learn more about Lincoln, the events that surround him and his many ties to this community, that the plaza will foster an appreciation for and return to meaningful public discourse, not 30-second sound bites, and at that it will still in all who come here a renewed appreciation for the concept that all men are created equal and the full meaning of the phrase, we the people. Senator Paul Simon now teaches political science, history, and journalism at Southern Illinois University's Carbondale campus, where he also heads a public policy institute founded by him. At the age of 19, Paul became he said I can call him Paul, became the nation's youngest editor-publisher at the Troy Tribune in Troy, Illinois. From there, he built a chain of 13 newspapers in southern and central Illinois. Illinois' former senior U.S. Senator has enjoyed a long and illustrious political career. Elected to both the state's House and Senate, he also served a term as Lieutenant Governor. He spent 10 years in the United States House of Representatives before his 1984 Senate election. His wide-ranging policy interests span such diverse topics as the budget, education, disability policy, foreign affairs, labor, and television violence. During his 14 years in the legislature, Paul won the Independent Voters of Illinois Best Legislator Award every session. Simon began earning a reputation for political courage and integrity during his years in the legislature. He was chief sponsor of the state's open meetings law and of legislation creating the Illinois Arts Council, and he played a leading role in charting the state's community college system. During his service in the House of Representatives, Simon helped win passage of the bill that created the Illinois-Michigan Canal National Heritage Corridor. His many honors, include 55 honorary degrees. Professor Simon's current position allows him to indulge his penchant for the written word. A prolific writer, he already has 19 books to his credit on everything from world hunger to the dollar crisis to Abraham Lincoln. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Paul Simon.
I thank you. I thank you all. I thank you, Mayor Eschbach, and members of your city commission, Senator Welch, Representative Montino, county board chairman and members, and distinguished people on the platform, and all of you. And let me just commend you for being here. I did not expect to see this kind of a crowd here, and I'm proud of you for having shown up here. And let me add, this is important for the future, for a young girl right down the first row there, probably about 10 years old or so. 10 years old, okay. Yeah, an experienced grandfather can kind of guess these ages here. But when you're in a car, all you need to know is where you are and where you want to go, and you have a map and you can get there. But for a community, a state, and a nation, we not only have to know where we're going, we have to understand where we have been. And this is a reminder of where you have been, these great debates. And let me add, in the audience out here is the nation's expert on the Lincoln-Douglas debates from the state of New York, and I want you to stand up. Harold Holzer, stand up and take a bow back there. And I'm pleased to meet the sculptor, and I look forward to seeing your product here. Lincoln and Douglas served in the legislature together. And if you were to guess, just looking at them, which one would emerge as a national leader, you would have guessed Stephen A. Douglas. But Lincoln differed in one particular respect. He was willing to take unpopular stands. And in this first debate here in Ottawa, Stephen A. Douglas pointed out two of the unpopular stands that Lincoln took, one of which, a resolution passed overwhelmingly, 4 or 5 votes against it. Douglas referred to 4 votes against it. My recollection, it was 5 votes against it. But supporting slavery in the District of Columbia. And Abraham Lincoln cast an unpopular vote against that resolution. And then he served one term in the U.S. House of Representatives, and during that term, our war with Mexico was launched, and Abraham Lincoln voted against the war with Mexico. Very unpopular vote, and did not run for re-election. And I heard references, Mr. Mayor and Wayne Temple, to this is the year of the woman, in 1836, when Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election for his second term in the Illinois House of Representatives. As part of his announcement, he said he was for women's suffrage, almost a century before women were given the right to vote. But it is interesting, Lincoln was also a politician. He must have had so much adverse reaction to that, he never mentioned the issue again, as far as we know. But Reverend John Myers, the Methodist minister here, started this off talking about reaching out to others, reaching out to people of other races, of other religions. That would have appealed to Abraham Lincoln and his sense of where we ought to go. Between his service in the state legislature and Congress and his election as president, there was a party that became known as the Know Nothing Party was created in this country. Their technical term was the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, and they had a secret chapters in all the urban centers of the nation, and the members were told, when people ask you what you do, you say, I know nothing, and they became known as the Know Nothing Party. But they were anti-Catholic, and anti-Catholicism was very popular then. Even, as some of you here are old enough to remember, along with me, 1960, when the big issue in this country, believe it or not, can we survive as a democracy if we have a Roman Catholic as president? But they were anti-Catholic. They were against immigrants, particularly immigrants who were Irish and German. Eschbach would have had a rough time, Mr. Mayor, in those days, and they said the Irish and Germans are just naturally lazy people and shouldn't be part of this country. Well, it's kind of interesting, but Abraham Lincoln could have hopped on the anti-Catholic bandwagon or the anti-immigrant bandwagon, and he didn't. And he wrote to his friend Joshua Speed and said, I want nothing to do. If I'm going to live in that kind of a country that is against all these things, then I want to go to a country like Russia or someplace else where despotism is pure and unalloyed. The other thing, and meeting here in Washington Park, named obviously for George Washington, restraint was used by our early leaders and also by Abraham Lincoln, one of the virtues that we don't think of. I've had a chance to visit in other countries when they're just having their first elections, meeting with presidential candidates, telling them if you don't win, you congratulate the person who does win, that sort of thing. And we've gone through this. Richard Nixon lost to John F. Kennedy by a very close vote and could have said, let's get out in the streets and protest. Instead, he congratulated John F. Kennedy, even though he didn't feel like doing it, I'm sure. And not too many years later, he barely defeated Hubert Humphrey, and the same thing happened in reverse. And in the last presidential election, we had a mess, you will recall. And then the Supreme Court ruled, and we have differing opinions whether that was a wise ruling or not. And Al Gore made his best speech in his life, probably, when he said, I disagree with the decision, but I accept it. And the most powerful office in the world moved to George W. Bush without a person being injured, without a protest anywhere. Restraint. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. We had our revolution. And there were those who wanted to get even with those who supported the British. But they said no. Over in France, about the same time, they had the French Revolution, and they decided they were going to get even. They imprisoned hundreds of thousands. 17,000 people were executed. Thomas Paine, who was a pamphleteer in our American Revolution, went over to France and wrote some things for the French Revolution. And then he, when the revolution was over, he said, I don't favor executing the King of France. I favor exiling him into an island somewhere. And because he said this unpopular thing, Thomas Paine was put in prison for 11 months. Restraint. And the greatest restraint was shown in the history of our country by Abraham Lincoln in what I think, and you've heard references to the Gettysburg Address, and it was a great speech, but I think his greatest speech was his second inaugural address. And there we were still in the Civil War. We had a bitterness in this country that we have never known. 1 out of every 11 men in military age died in that war. Families were split. And we had just gone through a bitter battle in which there were 60,000 casualties, 24,000 men killed, and people expected the leader of one side, our side, to get up and say, we're going to beat those so-and-sos. And Abraham Lincoln got up and talked about with malice toward none, with charity to all. There was a greatness of spirit that no president before or since has shown. It was an amazing thing. In a sense, he pardoned the South. There were people who wanted to prosecute as many as 1 million people in the South. That didn't happen. Only one person was executed, the superintendent of the Andersonville prison, because he had been responsible for killing some prisoners. The generosity of spirit, the reaching out, that's what we need in this post-September 11th period. And I think we can learn from Lincoln and also from Douglas, who wasn't as enlightened as we look back on it as Lincoln was, but who joined Lincoln in the cause of the Union. Finally, Wayne Temple was generous in mentioning a book that I wrote about Lincoln's years in the legislature. I didn't intend to write such a book. I was elected, Pat, to the state legislature. I went to the State Historical Library and said, I'd like a book about Lincoln's years in the legislature. And they said, there isn't any such book. So I wrote to the two people who were then I knew as Lincoln names, Carl Sandburg and Allen Nevins, and said, you ought to write a book about Lincoln's years in the legislature. And they wrote back to me and said, you ought to write a book about it. And so I did. But during this period when I was writing the book, someone came to our home and asked my 3-year-old daughter, Sheila, what does your daddy do? And she responded, he works on Abraham Lincoln. I think the reverse is true, and I hope will be true not only for this nation, but around the world. The most revered American around the world is Abraham Lincoln. His generosity of spirit, his reaching out to try to help people who are less fortunate. That's what we need today, just as we did in Lincoln's time. It's what we will need 50 years from now. And what you have done, Mr. Mayor and your members of your committee and everyone else here, you have put this reminder. This isn't just a statue. This is a symbol of what we want to be as Americans and as citizens of the world. Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet
At this time, I'll ask the color guard to retire the colors.